The forest was quiet. Too quiet, until the snow exploded in a flurry of motion, fur, scales, and blood. A massive python had wrapped its body around a German shepherd, and she was losing air, fast, then without sound. Another shepherd burst from the trees, his ribs still raw from a wound that hadn't healed, his breath heavy, but his eyes locked onto the snake's throat like he'd waited his whole life for this moment. He didn't bark, he attacked. Before we begin this unforgettable story, would you mind sharing where you're from in the comments? And if stories of love, loyalty, and second chances move you, please give this video a like and consider subscribing. Sierra Nevada, California, late winter, just before the thaw. The wind along the ridgelines of Sierra Nevada had a memory of its own, ancient, unyielding, and laced with the scent of melting pine. Snow still cloaked the forest floor in brittle white, but the sky bore hints of the coming thaw, far below the peaks. Tucked at the edge of a dying logging road stood a cabin that looked more like a stubborn thought than a home. Smoke trickled weakly from the chimney. Inside, Jake Carson sat with his back to the world. Jake was a man shaped by war and solitude, in his late 40s. His frame was lean but not weak, sinewed like a rope left too long in the sun. His face bore the weary geometry of a man who had seen too much, with sun-creased skin, a peppered beard, and pale gray eyes that didn't blink at ghosts anymore. Once a staff sergeant in the Marines. Now just a man trying to remember how to breathe. The cabin had belonged to his father, an old ranger who'd taught Jake to track elk before he could ride a bike, and after the second tour in Afghanistan. It became the only place Jake could exist without the walls closing in. He had no phone, no internet, just a shortwave radio and a single photograph on the mantel, him and a soldier named Daniel. Grinning like idiots before the convoy rolled out. Daniel never came back, some days. Jake wasn't sure he had either. That morning, he'd been chopping kindling when he heard it, just beyond the snowbank at the tree line. A sound too deliberate for the wind. A crunch. Then silence. He paused, axe midair. Another crunch. Something, or someone, was out there. He reached for the Winchester leaning beside the door, but didn't raise it. Not yet. Boots crunching over crusted snow. He followed the sound with cautious steps. Boots sinking just enough to remind him spring was near. He passed the old elk blind, a relic from when his father still hunted. And that's when he saw it. A dog? No, a wolf. He thought at first, but as it turned its head, the amber eyes met his, filled with wariness but no wildness. It was a German shepherd, but not like the ones in town chasing frisbees. This one was gaunt, ribs ridging under a matted black and tan coat dusted with snow. A proud animal brought low. Blood, dried and brown, stained its front left leg. Its gait was uneven, and as it shifted, Jake saw the collar, or what was left of it. The ring of scar tissue around its neck was deep and raw, like a wound that had once nearly been fatal and had never quite healed. Rope. Maybe a wire. Jake had seen worse in Kabul. Easy, he murmured, crouching low, palms open, not here to finish the job. The dog, he'd call it Bear. Though he hadn't spoken the name yet, watched him with the tension of an animal who had learned trust could kill you. It didn't growl, didn't run. It simply stood there, swaying on its feet like it wasn't sure whether to die or wait. Jake knew that feeling. It took 20 minutes to coax Bear closer. Jake laid down beef jerky from his pocket, one strip at a time, his voice a low gravel. The moment Bear collapsed from exhaustion. It was over. Jake wrapped him in an old flannel and lifted him with a grunt that stirred pain deep in his ribs. Back in the cabin, Jake cleaned the wound while Bear slept by the fire. The leg wasn't broken, just torn, probably caught on something metal. Jake disinfected it with whiskey and snowmelt, his hands steady as they hadn't been in years. He poured broth into a bowl and left it beside the dog. Then, finally, he spoke the name. "Bear," he said aloud. "That's what you are." Bear twitched but didn't wake. Jake leaned back against the hearth, arms crossed, staring into the flames. Outside, the trees swayed. Winter was ending, but for the first time in years, something else was beginning. Night had settled over the Sierra Nevada like a blanket pulled tight, muffling sound and light beneath its thick folds of snow. The wind had quieted, replaced by a silence so deep it felt sacred, broken only by the occasional creak of trees under their own frozen weight. In Jake Carson's cabin, the fire crackled softly in the stone hearth. Bear lay curled beside it, his breathing even, though his ears twitched at every gust against the windows. Jake was half asleep in the armchair, wrapped in an old wool blanket, a dog-eared paperback resting on his chest. The day had been uneventful, cutting firewood, checking traps, boiling broth, but a heaviness had settled in his bones that he couldn't shake. He hadn't heard from the outside world in over a week, and he didn't miss it. But then Bear stood up, suddenly all tension. His ears pricked, head turned sharply toward the door. He let out a single bark, low and fierce, followed by a growl that rumbled like distant thunder. Jake sat up, startled. "What is it?" Boy Bear didn't answer. He sprinted to the door, barking with sharp urgency, pawing at the wood. Jake reached for the flashlight in his coat, fumbling with the latch the moment he cracked the door open. Bear bolted into the darkness, disappearing into the snow-covered woods. Jake cursed under his breath and ran after him. The cold bit deep. His boots crunched into the hard crust of the snow, and the beam of his flashlight cut raggedly through the shadows between trees. He followed the deep paw prints, his breath heaving out in bursts. "Bear," he shouted, "get back here." No answer, just wind. And then a sound he would never forget. A choked whimper, followed by the unmistakable hiss of something reptilian, something large. Jake's legs moved faster than thought. He tore through the brush until the beam of his flashlight landed on a grotesque sight. A massive python, thick as a log and glistening in the moonlight, coiled tightly around the trembling body of a dog. It wasn't Bear. The animal caught in the serpent's grip was a German shepherd, smaller and sleeker, fur golden and white but smeared with mud and blood. Her limbs jerked weakly, lungs collapsing under the pressure. Her eyes rolled back. The python tightened, its muscular body pulsing with lethal rhythm. And then Bear came. He didn't bark this time, he just leapt, with the fury of something ancient and primal. Bear launched himself at the python. Jaws wide, teeth gleaming, he slammed into the coils, biting deep into the flesh of the snake, clawing, shaking, refusing to let go. The python hissed, reared back, and in that moment, Jake saw Bear clamp down hard, right at the neck, behind the jaws. The serpent writhed, twisting, trying to throw him off, but Bear held. The dog, in its grip, still barely breathing, fell limp, and with a final, violent jerk, the snake released her and slithered into the trees, its long body trailing blood across the snow. Jake dropped to his knees, breath frozen in his chest. Bear stood over the fallen dog, panting. Blood streaked across his muzzle. His eyes never left the shape beneath him. She didn't move. Jake reached forward, gently pressed 2 fingers to her chest. A heartbeat. faint. But there. He looked at Bear. The dog looked back, exhausted, but unbroken. "We're not losing her," Jake said aloud, voice hoarse, and as the snow began to fall again, light and silent, Jake lifted the limp body into his arms. Bear followed closely, limping now, but his eyes never strayed from her. Together. They made their way home through the trees. Sky lay near the fire, wrapped in wool blankets damp with melted snow and streaked with blood. The cabin air smelled of pine sap, iron, and something older. Fear, maybe, or memory. Her chest rose and fell with difficulty, each breath a fragile thread tethering her to the present. The bruises along her ribs had deepened to a purplish black. Jake had done what he could, cleaned the worst of the wounds, wrapped her torso, and fed her small amounts of broth. But it wasn't enough. Bear hadn't left her side. He lay curved around her body like a shield, his thick coat pressed against hers. Though the battle with the python had reopened one of his old wounds, he didn't whine or flinch. His amber eyes were fixed, alert, guarding her in the flickering firelight. Jake stood over the table, hands trembling slightly as he turned the dial on the shortwave radio. His voice was low but firm when he spoke. "Arrow Pine Station. This is Jake Carson. I need Emily Hayes. Tell her it's urgent." Emily arrived before the sun had reached its peak. Her snow-dusted boots creaked on the wooden porch as she stepped inside. Carrying a canvas medical kit in one hand and gripping the small hand of a boy in the other. Emily was a woman shaped by silence and patience. She had the kind of beauty that didn't beg to be seen. Slim, with sharp cheekbones, windswept brown hair pulled into a loose braid, and hazel eyes always 2 thoughts ahead. In town. She was known for her calm voice, even when wrangling feral cats or arguing with school board officials. After her parents died in a car accident 10 years prior, Emily had taken custody of her younger brother Noah. Raising him shaped her, made her softer around the edges, but with a core as steady as granite. Noah, 9 years old, clung quietly to her coat. He was small for his age, pale with a mop of sandy brown hair and thin shoulders that hunched inward as if he were trying to disappear into himself. His blue eyes, wide and silent, took in everything but betrayed nothing. He hadn't spoken in 2 years, not since the night fire had claimed their father. A volunteer firefighter lost in the line of duty. Since then, Noah had been a quiet echo in every room, responding only to drawings and the occasional soft song Emily hummed to him before bed. As they stepped into the cabin, the boy's eyes went immediately to the fire and to the 2 figures lying beside it. Emily knelt beside Sky without a word. Her breath caught when she saw the bruising, the shallow breathing. "Oh, girl," she whispered, placing a gentle hand on the dog's side. Bear stirred slightly, then settled again. Recognizing her calm, "She's holding on," Jake said from behind her, "but I don't know for how long." Emily pulled open her kit and began working, checking Sky's gums, cleaning punctures, dabbing ointment onto the raw wounds. She moved with practiced care, her touch confident, her mind clearly ticking through a familiar process. Jake watched for a moment, then turned his attention to Noah, who had stepped forward, just beyond the edge of the hearth. The boy stared at Sky with wide eyes. His fingers twitched at his sides. Bear lifted his head. The dog didn't growl, he didn't move, he just looked at the boy. And Noah stepped closer. Emily paused, eyes flicking up, but she didn't stop him. Noah crouched. Slowly, deliberately, he reached one hand forward, not touching Sky, but resting it lightly on the edge of the blanket beneath her. Then he spoke. Sky. One word, barely above a whisper. But in that instant, the room changed. Emily froze. Jake's eyes widened. Bear blinked, slowly, and let out a low breath through his nose like a sigh that had been waiting for years. Noah repeated the name, louder this time. Sky. His voice was soft, dry from disuse, but steady. Emily reached for him, gently touching his shoulder. Her face was unreadable, eyes glassy, lips parted, stunned into stillness. Jake exhaled. That's her name now, he said, voice hoarse. Sky. Noah looked up at Bear. For a heartbeat. The dog and the boy simply regarded each other, two survivors shaped by silence, both standing on the edge of something neither could name, and in Bear's eyes. Something melted, not weakness, not surrender, but a quiet letting go. The hardness behind his stare softened. The lines in his jaw slackened. He turned his head, nuzzled Sky gently at the shoulder, and lay back down beside her. Emily blinked rapidly, then resumed her work. Voice hushed. She's going to need time, but she's lucky. Most wouldn't have made it. She's not alone. Jake replied. Noah sat beside Sky without saying another word, but he didn't need to. Sometimes, the loudest truths are spoken in whispers. The makeshift field clinic stood just beyond the tree line on the southern edge of Arrow Pines, pieced together from an old ranger outpost in a shipping container converted into a recovery unit. Snow still coated the shaded northern side of the building, but the dirt parking area had turned to slush under the weight of sun and footsteps. Jake's truck pulled in with a low rumble, its tires spitting mud. Emily was already waiting. She stood outside in a thick wool sweater under her parka, clipboard tucked beneath her arm. Her face, though composed, held an edge of concern. Inside the truck bed, Sky lay wrapped in blankets, her breathing shallow, eyes closed, beside her. Bear sat upright. He hadn't moved during the entire ride. His ears remained alert, body rigid, eyes constantly on Sky every time she whimpered in her sleep. He let out a soft grunt, almost like a whispered promise. I'm still here. Jake opened the tailgate carefully, but Bear's gaze didn't shift. He won't move, he said simply. Emily approached slowly, one hand raised. That's okay. We'll bring her in with him. They rolled the gurney to the edge of the truck. Jake helped lift Sky while Bear stood, tense but quiet, once Sky was secured. Bear jumped down without needing instruction, his body moving on instinct, following her into the clinic. The main room was sterile but warm. A single exam table dominated the space, surrounded by portable monitors and a tower of supply crates. It wasn't much, but it had saved lives before. From eagle chicks to mountain lion cubs. Dr. Evelyn Hart met them at the door, in her late 50s. Evelyn had the sharp, no-nonsense bearing of someone who'd spent most of her adult life coaxing life back into broken things. Her graying hair was always pulled into a tight bun, her eyes piercing behind smudged glasses. Tall and lean, she moved with a kind of gentle authority that made even the most skittish animals settle. She took one look at Sky, and her face shifted. Get her on the table, she ordered, already pulling on gloves. Bear followed right up to the edge when a vet tech tried to block him. Evelyn held up a hand, let him stay, as Emily and Jake stood back. Evelyn began her work. X-rays were taken, vitals monitored, fluids connected. A long hour passed before she looked up. She's stable, Evelyn announced. 2 fractured ribs, some deep bruising, mild liver trauma, but no internal bleeding that's life-threatening. It'll be a long recovery, but she's young, strong. Jake exhaled, the tension in his jaw finally giving way. Bear, still unmoving, lay down beside the metal table and rested his chin on the floor, facing upward so he could see her face. "He hasn't eaten," Emily said quietly. "Hasn't slept either." "He won't," Jake added. "Not until she wakes up." 3 days passed. Sky remained unconscious for most of it, drifting in and out like mist on a lake. Bear never left her side. He lay beside her day and night. He didn't drink unless Jake brought a bowl directly to him, didn't eat unless Emily coaxed him with her calm voice. He would only leave the room to relieve himself. And only when Jake stayed to guard Sky in his place. Everyone in the clinic took notice. Volunteers and techs whispered in the hallway. Evelyn watched through the half-glass door more than once, her arms folded, lips pressed tight, unwilling to admit that what they were witnessing was something more than instinct. On the 4th morning, something changed. Sky stirred. It began with the twitch of a paw, then a flicker of the ear. Bear stood instantly, leaning forward but not touching her. Sky groaned, eyes fluttering open like someone surfacing from underwater. Her gaze was unfocused at first, then sharpened. She saw him. Bear stood completely still, his breath held. Sky blinked once, twice, and then simply stared at him. In that moment, the room was utterly silent. Emily, watching through the window, whispered, "They remember." Sky didn't wag her tail. Bear didn't move, but something passed between them that was older than language, older than memory itself. A recognition forged in pain and protection. Jake watched too, arms crossed tightly. "They're bonded," he said, not looking away. Emily nodded, and neither of them asked for it. But now it's there. Later that afternoon, as Bear finally accepted a full meal and curled up to sleep beside her bed for the first time. Emily pulled Jake aside into the corridor. "I've been thinking," she said, eyes flicking toward the window where Sky now rested peacefully. "About something bigger?" Jake raised an eyebrow. "Bigger than this." She smiled softly. "Not bigger, just wider, deeper." She held up her clipboard and turned it toward him. A sketched-out diagram, messy but intentional. Fenced paddocks, small cabins, animal enclosures beside sensory gardens and walking trails. "A center," she said. "Not just for animals like Sky, for kids like Noah, for people who've been through things. I want to call it the refuge." Jake didn't reply right away. She continued. "The way Sky responded to Noah, that wasn't random. It mattered. It means there's something in these broken creatures that can reach the parts of us that nothing else can." Jake looked back through the window, at Bear sleeping beside Sky, both of them breathing in sync. He thought about his own years of silence, about the night he found Bear in the snow, about the boy who whispered a name into a cabin filled with ghosts. "You really think something like that could work?" he asked. Emily looked him dead in the eyes. "I don't think I know." Jake stared at the blueprint again. Then he gave a slow, small nod. "Let's build it." By early October, the Sierra Nevada forest had traded its silver blanket of snow for a cascade of gold and copper. The tall pines still stood like ancient guardians, their needles swaying gently in the breeze. But now, the underbrush was scattered with fallen leaves that crackled softly beneath every step. The air was cooler, brisker, but not sharp. It smelled of earth, moss, and the quiet promise of change. At the edge of a wide clearing where once only stumps and shadows stood, something new had taken root. Sky moved slowly through the cabin garden, her gait steady but cautious. The bruises had long since faded, but the memory of pain still lingered in the way her back leg curled slightly inward with each step. Her fur, once matted and dulled, now shimmered in the sunlight. A pale golden coat with streaks of white brushing her haunches and muzzle. She paused near a patch of wild daisies, nose twitching, then sat quietly, breathing in the morning. A few paces behind her, Bear watched. He didn't follow too close, never did now. He'd taken to walking a respectful distance behind her, always far enough not to crowd, but near enough to act if needed. It was as if he understood, on some primal level, that she no longer needed saving, only witnessing. His frame had thickened again with rest and proper food. His eyes, though still sharp, no longer bore the hard edge of a soldier. He was still vigilant, still protective, but quieter inside, like the forest around them. Jake stood on the porch of the newly built side cabin, arms crossed loosely over his chest, a thermos of black coffee steaming between his hands. His beard had grown fuller, streaked now with more gray than black. He had started to wear a wristwatch again, something he hadn't done in years. Small choices like that, Emily had once said, were signs that he was letting time move again. Emily had just returned from town, where she'd secured the last of the permits. She climbed out of her Subaru with a dusty backpack and a tired grin. "Fencing's going up tomorrow," she said, joining Jake at the porch. The lumber donation came through, and the local paper's sending a writer out next week. Jake nodded. Still can't believe people are this interested in a dog and a boy. Emily glanced toward the garden. It's not just a dog and a boy, it's what they gave back to each other. She was right, of course. The project they had named Sky Refuge was no longer an idea, sketched in pencil. It was real now, a network of cabins, open kennels, walking paths, a small classroom at the edge of the tree line, designed to house animals in recovery and children in need of the kind of connection that couldn't be taught, only felt. Noah had taken to the place instantly. He now spent his mornings drawing in the shade of the pines, sometimes with a stick in the dirt, sometimes with charcoal on thick paper. He still didn't speak often, but when he did, his voice had grown more confident, less like a whisper clinging to the past. That afternoon, as Bear and Sky rested beneath the pines, Noah knelt near them with a handful of small stones, carefully lining them into a spiral pattern. Bear blinked, then extended a paw, disrupting the stones slightly. Noah laughed. It was soft and breathy, but unmistakably laughter. Emily heard it from the porch and turned her face away, wiping at her cheek without comment. Later, Jake and Emily walked the edge of the property, where fencing would soon rise. A new character joined them. Sarah Jennings, a retired trauma nurse in her early 60s who had volunteered to help oversee the animals. Tall and willowy, with silver-streaked black hair always pinned in a braid. Sarah was known in town for her quiet wisdom and deep empathy. Years spent tending to pain had left her with a slow, gentle way of speaking, as if rushing might shatter something fragile. After losing her own son in a highway accident 5 years ago, Sarah had gradually retreated from hospital work and found solace in the silence of animals. She now spent her mornings brushing fur, checking temperatures, and humming old gospel hymns under her breath. The animals trusted her instinctively. So did Jake. "This place is going to change people," she said, walking beside them through the half-cleared path. "Not because it's perfect, because it's honest." Jake didn't answer at first. He was watching Bear again, who now stood a little further off, head raised, scanning the tree line. He still does that. Jake murmured. Does what Sarah asked, guards her. Quietly. Sarah looked toward Sky, now curled under a tree, golden fur catching the last of the day's light. Maybe that's not guarding, she said softly. Maybe that's loving. As twilight descended, painting the forest in shades of violet and gray, the quiet deepened. The evening wind rustled through the pines like a whispered prayer, and the animals began settling for the night. Jake lit the lanterns one by one. Emily sat on the steps of the porch beside Noah, who leaned against her shoulder, eyes half closed. Sarah swept the porch gently with a straw broom, humming low and slow. And Sky. She lay stretched out in the clearing, her head resting on a patch of moss where sunlight had once warmed the ground. Her breathing was steady now, slow and deep, as if, finally, her body had let go of every pain it once carried. Bear stood a few feet away, his gaze steady, ears relaxed. He didn't lie down yet. Not until the wind had stilled and every sound had settled into that quiet that only old forests know. Then, without sound or ceremony, he walked over, turned once, and lay down beside her. Not touching, just near, guarding, perhaps, or simply loving. The last light faded behind the ridges, and the stars began to flicker above them, ancient witnesses to a world that, even in its wildest places, still remembered how to heal. Sometimes, the greatest miracles don't come in thunder or fire. They come quietly, in the way a wounded dog chooses to protect instead of hide. Or how a boy finds his voice through the soft presence of something broken, yet brave. Sky and Bear didn't speak a single word, but they taught us everything about loyalty, healing, and the silent language of love. Perhaps it's no coincidence that in a world created by God, it is often the simplest creatures who reflect His grace best. In their scars, we see survival, in their stillness. We see peace, and in their bond. We are reminded that even after pain, hope still rises. So if you believe that healing is possible, if you believe that God can use even the quietest moments to restore the soul, then this story was meant for you. Let this be your reminder today. Never give up on love. Never stop believing in quiet miracles. And never doubt that God works through even the smallest acts of compassion. If this story touched your heart, share it with someone who needs a sign of hope. Comment below how it made you feel, and if you believe in the healing love of God, write Amen in the comments. Don't forget to subscribe for more stories of redemption and faith. And may God bless every soul who needed to hear this today.